So good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session, this teaching on this incredible text from Nagarjuna. I'm very happy that you are coming and that we have a chance to study this treatise. Last year we have studied the Sword of Wisdom, which mostly, of course, as the name suggests, it is a teaching on the two truths, the relative truth, the conventional truth, the meaning of emptiness, interdependent arising, and so on. And now it is quite appropriate to study a text about Buddha nature. So it is helpful to understand the context. In the wholeness of the Buddha Dharma, it is useful to understand the context in which this teaching is placed, or where it belongs, I suppose. So the teachings of the Buddha are organized, or usually categorized, in three classes. So the first turning, second turning, third turning. So we speak of the three turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. In the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha taught mostly about what is the nature of a current situation, that which we call cyclic existence, samsara. What is the meaning of suffering? What is the meaning of happiness? What is the meaning of bondage? What is the meaning of liberation, awakening? He also taught about the principle of karma, cause and effect, how cyclic existence functions in terms of the 12 links of interdependent arising, teachings on the Four Noble Truths, and so on. And also, as part of the first turning, of course, the Buddha also taught about that there is no self. There is no self of the individual, that self of the individual is an illusion that is projected upon the five aggregates. So all that is part of what we call the first turning of the Buddhist teachings. Then, on the second turning, to the second turning belong the prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom type of teachings. And those teachings focus now on explaining, pointing the meaning of emptiness. Not just the absence of a self of the individual, but the meaning of emptiness on a vaster scale. Emptiness of self, of the individual, and emptiness of self, of phenomena. So the two, what sometimes it's referred to as the two no-selves. No self of the individual, no self of phenomena. But it's more than just that. It is really opening up what is the meaning of emptiness, which in the end will come down to also to understand what is the meaning of interdependent arising. So the sutras of the Prajna Paramita class, this is mostly what we talk about in the second turning of the wheel. So in the first turning, the Buddha pointed out, what is our situation? What is samsara? What is happiness? What is suffering? The Four Noble Truths, what is the cause of suffering? What is the path to the end of suffering? And so on. On the second turning, the Buddha explained the teachings on emptiness in order to counteract our strong grasping to true existence, our strong grasping to entities, to things being truly existent. And then there's the third turning. And in the third turning, the Buddha talked about the luminous nature. That is to say that this emptiness that we speak about in the second turning, it is not a mere absence. It is not a mere just absence of existence. The ultimate nature of the mind is the luminous, the pure luminous nature of the mind, which is also called Buddha nature. It is referred to sometimes Buddha nature, sometimes in some of these type of teachings it appears as element, the dhatu. Or of course the Sanskrit word Tathagata Garbha. So the Tathagata Garbha class of teachings, of sutras, which belong mostly to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. So, in order to understand the Buddha Dharma, it is necessary to sort of encompass all of these three turnings. They're all important. They're all important. Otherwise, our understanding is biased. Our understanding is partial. Is not complete. The view is not completely clear. So of course, here we are speaking from a Mahayana perspective. So for people that are studying also like Vajrayāna or like Dzogchen, for example, then we have a different sort of, we go further a little bit and there's different explanations, but within the realm of what we call Mahayana. So we have these three turnings of the wheel. And another way to categorize sometimes the teachings on the Buddha Dharma would be according to what is referred as the view, the path, and the fruit. So the view is how the mind perceives reality, or is the perspective about reality. The path is the practice, the application to attain a certain result. So what is the result? If we have a certain view and a certain practice, a meditation, what is the result of that? So view, path, and fruit. So if we, and most of the Buddhist systems of practice, they have their own explanations regarding view, meditation, and result. They're not contradictory, of course, they're just different explanations, because within the Buddhist tradition we have different vehicles, different approaches. So each approach will have its own explanation of the view, meditation, and result. That is according to that particular system. So in considering things from that perspective, this text that we are going to study would be both on the side of the view and the meditation. A large part of the text is about view. What is this luminous nature of the mind? What is what is Buddha mind? And then there's also a part of the text which is dedicated to meditation, that actually has practice instructions, meditation instructions. So both are part of this text. So like this, we can understand general context of where this text falls within the overall Buddhist teachings. I think it is also appropriate to say something about Nagarjuna, even though very briefly. Of course, it is very easy. You can just search online information about Nagarjuna. You can read some of his, at least from his geography, some of his details of his life, as far as is recorded anyway. But anyway, just as a very brief sort of reference. So Nagarjuna was definitely one of the most influential and referenced Buddhist masters of the early period of the Mahayana. The exact dates of his life are not exactly easy to pinpoint, because he was quite early. But in any case, it seems certain that Nagarjuna would have lived. Sorry. Nagarjuna would have lived sorry, so some technical difficulties. So it seems Nagarjuna would have lived approximately around the second or third century AD. He seems to have been born in Southeast India from a Brahmin family, and he went on to be ordained a Buddhist monk. He studied all the available Buddhist teachings. Mm. So he studied all the available Buddhist teachings at the time. And according to the hagiography of Nagarjuna, he would have attained first bhumis, would have attained realization of true nature, non-conceptual realization of emptiness, and he was also the one that would have retrieved or found or recovered the Prajnaparamita class of sutras that had been left hidden in the land of the Nagas. The Nagarjuna is mostly known as the founder of the Madhyamika Buddhist philosophy, so the Madhyamika teachings, which is really a great exploration of the Prajnaparamita class of teachings that really goes deeply into revealing the meaning of emptiness and interdependent arising. So as such, in the realm of the Mahayana, Nagarjuna is definitely one of the foremost names that I think everyone will have heard about or read somewhere about. So in particular, many people would have heard about one of his most famous treatises, which is called The Root Verses on the Middle Way, which is really the foundational treatise of the Madhyamika philosophical system, we can say like that. So usually when hearing the name Nagarjuna, everybody will just think about this very sharp reasoning, this very sharp logic that is used in his treatises to really cut down the nature of reality. That's I think the most common idea that everyone will have of Nagarjuna is this logical, the logical argumentation, the logical exposition that undermines that true existence, that shows the meaning of emptiness and interdependent arising. However, Nagarjuna did a lot more than that, right? So not only he was a famous teacher, but he was also responsible for building many temples and stupas, in addition to composing many teachings, not just on Madhyamika. So Nagarjuna is, without a doubt, one of the most authoritative figures in Mahayana Buddhism. He inspired centuries of commentary, study, and views. I mean, after Nagarjuna's time, there's many commentaries and expositions and developments that are based upon Nagarjuna's work. In general, however, there are three texts or three classes of texts that are attributed to Nagarjuna. Three collections of texts. These are the collection of speeches, the collection of reasoning, and the collection of praises. Right, three collections of texts. So, and these three collections relate to the three turnings of the wheel of the Dharma, which I just spoke about before. So, in general, the texts that belong to the collection of speeches are considered to be, they are mostly related to the teachings of the first turning of the wheel. So they focus on explaining the basis of the Dharma, in particular the aspect of conduct and manifested Dharmas. The second, which is the collection of reasoning, is related mostly to the second turning of the wheel, and is mostly the teachings on emptiness. So that's what I had mentioned before, and it has the texts that shows the meaning of emptiness and dependent arising. And these are the ones that Nagarjuna is really famous for and that most people will know him for. And then thirdly, there's the collection of praises, which is then connected to the experience of the nature of reality in a practical sense. And in particular, the principle of Buddha nature. And in that way, it is more related to the third turning. So in the collection of praises, there are three types of texts. There are praises to the ground, praises to the path, and praises to the result. So this particular text that we are studying now, that we're going to study, it belongs to the first category of praises, which is praises to the ground. So in this case, praises to the Dhatu, so which in this case means the fundamental nature of phenomena. So in the later Tathagata Garba literature, the term dhatu or element is often used to refer to Buddha nature, which is the fundamental principle, the fundamental primordially pure nature that is present within all beings. The term dhatu, this term dhatu, which is translated as element, can be used to refer to the fundamental nature of reality and phenomena, the primordial space, emptiness, the great expanse. But it can also refer more specifically to the fundamental element that is at the root of being, which in this case would be synonymous to Buddha nature. So when the word element is used here in this text, it is not in the sense of some substantial or existing subtle particle, like elemental particle or something like this. It doesn't mean anything like this or anything substantial. The term dhatu as element instead is pointing to the basic common basis, or we can say a common basic element. What is this common basic element? That is Buddha nature. So this type of teaching is extremely important because without it, our view will become one-sided. So the reason is that these two aspects, we have the aspects of emptiness, which is mostly taught in the second turning of the will in the Prajnaparamita type of teachings and Madhyamika teachings, and the luminous aspect of the pure luminous aspect of the mind. They are not separate. They're not two things. It's not like one is more true than the other or something like this, or more important than the other. So in fact, even in the Prajnaparamita class of teachings, it is always said that emptiness and luminosity, they are union. They are inseparable, right? So normally, however, it is considered that the master, that is the great expounder of the Buddha nature teachings, is a Sangha, or Maitreya, depending on how you consider it. So, and his works are sometimes referred as belonging to the philosophical class of what can be called the Yogacara Madhyamika type of teachings. However, as we will see during this text of Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna is also explaining the contents of the third turning sutras, of the Tathagata Garba type of teachings, very much in line with the teachings that we find in Sangha's works. And this is important to mention, and this is important to refer, because there's a tendency in some scholarly works, in some scholarly circles, to put one of these aspects above the other and say this is higher, this is the ultimate, or something like this. But if we try to do that, if we try to say that one aspect, either the emptiness or the luminosity, is higher or more ultimate, we will always fall into limitation. We will always fall into some kind of extreme position. So even though there are texts and treatises that focus more on explaining one of these aspects, in the end we will see, as we will see, we will always come to the conclusion that the ultimate nature of reality is the union of emptiness and luminosity. And also in this text from Nagarjuna, that will be made clear. So the teachings on emptiness, or the Madhyamika teachings, they never undermine and they never destroy the pure luminous ground of being. So when we study, if we engage in this profound reasoning and analysis that Nagarjuna does in his Madhyamika texts, we will completely destroy all ideas regarding true existence, regarding the four extremes, right? So the four extremes, the four extremes of it exists, it does not exist, both and neither. So the Madhyamika philosophy will completely destroy these four extremes in relation to phenomena. But with what it cannot destroy and what it does not destroy is the pure luminous ground of mind, which in itself is empty as well, as we will see. So as we go through the text, this will become more clear. But in the case of this particular text by Nagarjuna, we can say that it fits perfectly well. It is definitely a Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature class of teaching. So the main message of this text is about the naturally luminous mind nature, which is veiled by temporary stains or temporary defilements, and then it can become freed from such defilements. So in regard to this sort of contention, if you will, or this kind of issue of which teaching is more ultimate or less ultimate, if it's the emptiness or the Buddha nature and so on. In regard to that, the seventh Karmapa, he wrote in one of his texts regarding the two approaches of Nagarjuna and the Sangha. He says that they are both grounded in luminous mind. So the seventh Karmapa says like this. He says, the great Yogacara Madhyamikas who follow a Sangha through determining or ascertaining that the dualistic appearances of subject and object, which obscure this true reality, are not established in the way they appear, they mainly teach the wisdom that realizes the self-aware luminous mind, right? And that the Nagarjuna and his heirs, by analyzing, by very detailed analysis, the clinging, the way we cling, the way the mind clings to real existence and to the objects that obscure this true reality through the Madhyamika analysis, then they mainly teach that the nature of luminous mind abides as emptiness. So they teach that the nature of this luminous mind is empty. So in this way, the Karmapa says like this, in this way, they ascertain that any such clinging on its objects are without the nature. So the Karmapa further says that both systems, both the Nagarjuna and the Sangha system, they do not differ in teaching the final true reality. Since this very nature of the luminous mind primordially is emptiness, and this emptiness primordially abides as this essential character of luminosity, right? So it is just two ways to go about it, if you will. So any idea that one system is superior or higher or more ultimate than the other, it is really misleading, and we should sort of steer away from that idea and understand that it's very important to understand both approaches and both perspectives to have a really complete, thorough understanding of the Buddha Dharma. Okay, so, but even though these teachings on Buddha nature, on this luminous nature of the mind, even though these type of teachings are mostly found in the third turning of the will of Dharma, the sutras that belong to the third turning class, because that's where they're mostly developed, that's where where this principle is mostly developed, where this principle is really explained in greater detail. However, it's not like the Buddha didn't talk about the luminous nature before, or in the second turning, or even in the first turning, for that matter. Because we find clear references to this luminous nature in the Prajnaparamita class of sutras. Even though, as I said before, of course, in the Prajnaparamita class of sutras, the objective is different, so the focus is more on the empty aspect. But it's there, nonetheless, it's there, and there are very famous citations that we find from the Prajnaparamita sutras. I think one of the most famous citations on this topic is a very famous line that says, "There is no mind in mind. The nature of mind is luminosity." Right? So this is from the Prajnaparamita sutras. There is no mind in mind, the empty aspect. The nature of mind is luminosity. And there's another that says, where Subhuti is speaking, and there's another one that says, Subhuti, these minds are natural luminosity. It says like this: it is thus that the Tathagata fully knows reality just as it is. So this is also found in the Prajnaparamita type of texts, and even in the Pali Canon there's a reference. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. So this is just to illustrate that this mentioning of the luminous nature of the mind, it is found throughout the sutras, even though it is in the third turning sutras that this is really explained in greater detail, focused. not just the third turning sutras, but also, of course, all the commentarial traditions that develop. And that is, of course, mostly was developed by Asanga and the followers of Asanga. But not just, because Nagarjuna also did it. And that's why this text is so interesting. That's one of the reasons why this text is so interesting, is because even though Nagarjuna is mostly known as the father of Madhyamika philosophy, the great expounder of the meaning of emptiness, he wrote, in his collection of praises, about Buddha nature, about the element, about this luminous nature also. And that's one of the reasons why this text is so important, because sometimes you can feel this temptation to sort of follow some ideas that the Madhyamika presented by Nagarjuna, it was his kind of only teaching or something like this. And if we take that too far, we can fall a little bit into the extreme of nihilism. So to understand that Nagarjuna also taught about the luminous nature is quite important in general. Okay, and this text is, of course, the great reference on this topic is Asanga's Asanga Maitreya Uttaratanta Shastra. That's a much larger treatise, which is, of course, very profound, very important to study. This text by Nagarjuna is much more concise and smaller, but in essence is really pointing to the same meaning, right? Okay. So let's start with the text itself now. So root text. So you can look at the root text, which I published for your reference. I added a simple outline to the text. The outline is not part of the root text. I used an outline from the commentarial tradition, but I simplified it a little bit because the outlines that we find usually traditionally, they are very complex. So I simplified it a little bit just to make it easier to understand the structure of the text. In any case, so the root text, the title, In Praise of the Dharmadhatu, by Nagarjuna. So the first stanza, which is the paying of homage to the Dharmadhatu, the first stanza says, there is something which, as long as left unknown, results in life's three realms of vicious circle. Beyond all doubt, it dwells in every being. To the Dharmadhatu I devoutly bow. Okay, so this is the first stanza. I would like to, before we even start with the text, to sort of pay attention and draw attention to the last line of this stanza. To the Dharmadhatu I devoutly bow. Okay, and I say this because, again, is this image, maybe it's just me, I don't know, but I think this general idea, this general image that we have, or that I have, that I think is generally actually of Nagarjuna as this hardcore, philosopher. This hardcore logic and reasoning of the Madhyamika, and we tend not to see Nagarjuna on his other side, his devout side, is the master that built stupas and wrote the praises and at many dimensions, not just that. So I think this is quite important because it's an example also for us. It can be sometimes easy, especially in our Western world, where we have this tendency for more intellectualizing things. We like a lot of this philosophical logic type of approach. And of course, reading Nagarjuna's Madhyamika texts, it appeals to many people in that sense. And so to bring out this other side of Nagarjuna, to show that Nagarjuna had another side to that, is also an example, actually, not to fall too much into one side, to over-intellectualize, I suppose. To understand that the role of Madhyamika, the logic that kind of points to the empty nature, to the absence of true existence, is very important. But the teachings that are in this text are also very important. There's not one more important than the other. I want to repeat this again. So, okay, so in any case, so there is something, so the stanza, there is something which as long as left unknown. So there is something, there is something, there is something which as long as it's unknown, it results in circling in samsara. Right? That's basically what the first two lines say. So sentient beings are circling in samsara because of something that is left, that is unknown. So fundamentally, Nagarjuna is opening the text by saying that there is something that is unknown. And that something that is unknown is the reason why sentient beings circle within samsara. That which is left unknown, what is that which is left unknown? That which is left unknown is this pure and luminous heart, this pure and luminous essential core, the real meaning of Buddhahood. So this luminous pure core or luminous pure heart is veiled, temporarily veiled by ignorance and defilements, temporary defilements. And it is due to these temporary defilements that are obscuring this Buddha nature that the world and the beings appear. And we speak of sentient beings and we speak of samsara, right? So due to these defilements, due to these temporary defilements, the mind does not recognize its own true essence. And due to that, it projects two kinds of self. It projects the self subject, me, and it projects the self of everything else, the phenomena that appear, self and other. And it does more than that. It projects the self of the individual, it projects the self of phenomena, and to both of them it attributes true existence. The self of myself truly exists, and the self of phenomena also truly exists. So, and it is due to this that sentient beings circle around in the realms of samsara, according to the mode of how it is explained in the 12 links of dependent arising, circling between the samsaric realms. However, every being without exception has this pure luminous core, essence, heart, whatever you want to call it, which is its actual nature. And it is to this heart, this pure luminous heart, that we are referring to when we use the word Buddha. So the word Buddha means nothing than just this pure luminous nature. And this is why Nagarjuna opens with this homage to the Dharmadhatu. Because there's nothing more superior to that. There's nothing more important to that. When we bow down to the Buddha, what are we bowing down to? Are we bowing down to a statue? Are we bowing down to a picture? Are we bowing down to a piece of stone? No, of course not. We are bowing down to this, to the pure luminous nature, which is itself. That is what Buddha is. And that's why Nagarjuna opens with this homage to the Dharmadhatu, because there's nothing superior to that. This Dharmadhatu, which is itself the pure luminous great expanse, the pure Buddha mind, that is all-pervasive, primordially pure, spontaneously perfected, to that is paying homage. So there are several points, or two main points, that we should consider or understand that are really at the heart of this treatise, of this teaching. So the first point is this issue of this element, that which is called the element, right? The dhatu, Buddha nature. Tathagatāgarbha, this pure luminous heart. So the first point is that this element is primordially pure and primordially present. This means that it is beyond cause. It is not something that is caused. It is not something that needs to be created or developed. It is primordially present and is primordially pure. That's the first point. The second point that will be explored in this treatise is that these defilements, these temporary defilements that seem to obscure this pure luminous heart, what are they exactly? What are these defilements? And even more important perhaps, how are they removed? What is the meaning of removing these defilements? So in the text, it explains that these defilements are temporary, so they are not permanent, they are not truly existent, nor are they part of the element. You see, the element itself can never be corrupted or sullied or damaged by these defilements. Not possible. It is just like dust on the top of a window or a mirror. This is an example we use very often. If you have a window, and that window is covered with dust, and you cannot see anything, and you say that window is dirty, but that's not really true. The glass itself is always transparent. The glass is never made corrupted or sullied or dirty by the dust. The dust does not penetrate into the glass and corrupts it in any way. Or the mirror. The mirror never loses its capacity to reflect, no matter how much dust is on top. But due to the dust that is on top, you cannot see through the window. So it appears like the glass has lost its transparency, but this is not true. Right? So these temporary defilements that seem to obscure the pure luminous mind is exactly like this. It's like this. Right? So this Buddha mind can never be damaged, can never be corrupted, can never be sullied by these temporary defilements. So these are the first two main points that will be explored in great detail to this text, right? So the first is that the element, the pure luminous mind, it is primordially present and primordially pure, and it is covered by these temporary defilements, but these defilements are temporary, they're not permanent, and they can never really damage or sully, pollute the Buddha, this Buddha mind, this luminous mind. Okay. So I think that sort of creates the first type of overview of what this text is about, which is explained by that first stanza. And then we go into the main body of the text. So the main body of the text is organized into three sections. We can say that these three sections are related to how is this element in different stages. So we have sentient beings, right? Like human beings, for example. So what is happening there? So if someone is a human being, is a sentient being, so not a Buddha, but then we say that the element is primordially present. So how is that possible? How is the element present in sentient beings? For example, that's like the main point here. And then during the path, what happens? So as someone goes through the path, they reach the bodhisattva levels. So how is the element manifesting, or how can we speak of the element during the path? And what is the path also? So there's actually practical instructions as well. And then the final section would be the result. So how is the element manifesting in terms of result? Once it's released, if you will, from these temporary defilements, how is the element manifesting as the result? So these three sections of the text: how is the element at the time of sentient beings, how is the element during the path, and how is the element at the time of the result. So fundamentally, the reason why this is like this, as I just said, just to make it really clear, so if the element is primordially present and pure, as I just explained earlier, then how can we speak of sentient beings and Buddhas? Because if it's primordially present, how can there be sentient beings? So that is explained in the first part of the text. On the other hand, if the element is primordially pure, unstained, unsullied, how can we speak of a path? A path to what exactly? So that's also explained. That's the second part of the text. And finally, what is the result of clearing all those defilements? So what exactly is it that is the result if it's already there, right? So that's why the text is organized into these three sections, which we will understand. So the first section starts in stanza 2, which opens this first section of the text, which is the way the Dharmadhatu abides during the stage of sentient beings. And stanza 2 is like a general introduction. So introduction to the nature of the Dharmadhatu. What is this Dharmadhatu that we're talking about? What is the nature of this element in terms of, from the perspective of a sentient being, if you will, because I like this. So stanza 2 says, here, stanza 2 says, when that which forms the causes for all samsara is purified along the stages of the path, this purity itself is nirvana, precisely this, the Dharmakaya too. So this stanza is saying, when that which is the causes for samsara is purified along the path, that purity itself is nirvana, which is also called the Dharmakaya. So here he's saying that what is called nirvana is also called the Dharmakaya, at least in the context of this type of teaching. And what is that? That is that purity itself, which is the purity that is that manifests when the causes of samsara are purified along the stages of the path. There could be different ways to explain this. I will follow mostly the commentarial tradition, on this. So how is this element abiding at the stage of a sentient being, right? Because that's what this first stanza is sort of opening to. So in order to understand that, Nagarjuna here is saying that when that which forms the causes for samsara is purified along the stages of the path. So what is that which forms the causes for samsara, right? So that we must start by understanding that. So, and again, depending on the vehicle or the system, the level, the yan, and so on. Of course, this could be explained in slightly different ways. As I said, I will be following a specific commentarial tradition here that is very much connected with the third turning and is in alignment with the rest of the text, the way that Nagarjuna explains things. So in that case, in this context of this text, what is that which forms the causes for samsara? So the causes for samsara are to be found in what is called the ground consciousness, or the alaya vijnana, or as the alaya vijnana. So the alaya vijnana itself could be said to be the cause for samsara, loosely speaking. However, for those that are not familiar with this terminology and what the meaning of this is, it is important to clarify and to explain certain terms and principles. So in this explanation, as I said, we are looking from the point of view of the teachings that are contained within the third turning, and also some commentarial materials, commentary texts that come later on this text. And it's very closely connected with what we would refer to as the Yogacara Madhyamika position, to a point anyway. But not necessarily, because of course Nagarjuna predates such things. We don't even need to speak about that actually, because we can just relate to the way it is explained in the main third turning sutras, such as the Samdhiminokana Sutra and Lankavatara Sutra, for example, and things like this, without even relying on anything else, which is in full accordance with the way Nagarjuna is actually writing this treatise. And that's probably better, to just remain within that scope. so we're not going to talk about Yogacaras, Shittamatas. We're not going to talk about that in terms of the specificities of those philosophical tenets. That's not the point of this text. Some of the words, some of the terms, some of the principles that we are going to talk about are very similar or are used then in those philosophical tenets. However, we are not going to go into those philosophical tenets here. We are just going to remain within the explanation of the text according to the way Nagarjuna is explaining. And as I said, we can rely mostly on the sutras for that. No need to go into those later philosophical tenets. Anyway, so the terms here that we should start to understand and that are used in this type of teaching is the words for consciousness, mind, and intellect or mentation, which is Vijnana, Chitta, and Manas. So Vijnana means consciousness, Chitta, generally, loosely speaking, would be just generally translated into English as mind, and Manas is a little bit more tricky. Manas could be interpreted or translated as the operation of mind. It is sometimes translated as mentation. It is sometimes translated as intellect. In a general sense, it would refer to the functioning, to the operation of mind. So Vijnana is consciousness, Chitta, mind generally, and Manas. Well, you see, these terms, they're very important, and you find these terms in many classical Buddhist treatises. However, the precise meaning of these words is not always easy to explain or to define in general. That's because these words can be interpreted slightly different depending on the context or the philosophical system where they are being used. But as I said, in general sense, Vijnana means consciousness, Chitta means mind, and Manas, the operation of mind. Even though these are like the general way to translate these words, we need to understand what are they really pointing to. Otherwise, we can have our own ideas, okay, Vijnana is consciousness, and then we have our own idea of what consciousness means, and that's not very helpful. So it is important to understand what Vijnana means in the context in which it's being used in a particular system or text, right? Because all these words, they are pointing to very specific aspects of that what we generally call mind. And these words are used in very specific ways to sort of kind of map out, or explain the experience of that which we call mind. So as we try to map out and explain that which you call mind, these words, the specific meaning of these words are very important. So that's where context sometimes is relevant and changes things. However, in this particular text that we are studying now, Chitta is very often used to refer to the alaya Vijnana, to the ground consciousness, which I will explain in a moment what that means. The term Manas would refer to the seventh consciousness in the model of 8 consciousnesses, which I will explain in a moment. But it can also just so Manas usually would be used to refer to the 7th consciousness in this model of the 8 consciousnesses, but it can also be used to refer to the ignorant aspect of mind, to the ignorant aspect of mind itself, to the afflicted ignorant aspect. That Manas is also sometimes used in that sense. So even though in the end the seventh consciousness and the ignorant aspect of mind are really pointing to the same thing, ultimately, really. Even though there's some nuance there, but ultimately they're not really different things. So, but manas can be used either way. So the word vijnana, as I said, refer generally to consciousness. So the other point here, so now we have to understand, is this 8 consciousness model in general, because this is something that will appear throughout this text, and it's very important in this context of this teaching. So in the way to explain conventional mind, or from a conventional perspective of this samsaric, deluded mind, we speak of these 8 consciousnesses. So in short, there are the 5 sensory consciousnesses. So these are the field of consciousness for the sensory objects. So for example, the visual consciousness is conscious of the visual forms. This does not refer to the eye, okay? So the eyes are called the visual faculty or the visual organ. So based upon the visual faculty, which is connected to the visual organ, there arises visual consciousness. So, and that for the 5 senses. Then there is the 6th consciousness, which is sometimes referred to as main mind or principal mind. So the 6th consciousness refers to the consciousness of mental forms. So in this sense, you can also say that the 6th consciousness refers to the stream or to the flow of all the 6 consciousnesses together. And that is why it's called main mind, because that is what sentient beings usually would refer to as my mind. So you have the 5 sense consciousnesses, right? So the visual consciousness, the sound or hearing consciousness, smelling consciousness, and so on. And there's a flow, there's a stream of experience, if you will, of these 5 consciousnesses. And then there's the mental consciousness, which is conscious of the mental forms, but she's also conscious of the sensory consciousnesses. And so when we say my mind in just normal speech, when a person say that my mind, what are they talking about? They would be talking about the collection of all 6 consciousnesses, the stream, the flow of all these 6 consciousnesses, right? So the 5 sensory consciousnesses plus the mental consciousnesses. So that's why sometimes the collection of the 6 consciousnesses is referred to as the main mind, the principal mind. And then there is the 7th consciousness, which is called manas usually, as I said before. But in order to understand the 7th consciousness is easier to first understand, or is necessary actually, to understand the 8th consciousness. So we start there first. So the 8th consciousness, that's what's called the alaya vijnana. So I started in the beginning by speaking about the alaya vijnana. So Nagarjuna is speaking about the causes of samsara, and I said in this context that we say that what is the causes of samsara? Samsara arises from the alaya vijnana. So we have to understand what that means. So the alaya vijnana is part of this model, if you will, of these 8 consciousnesses, and it's the 8th consciousness. So alaya means something like ground or basis. Vijnana is consciousness. So alaya vijnana would mean something like the ground consciousness or the base consciousness. In one of the main sutras of the third turning, which is the Samdhiminokana Sutra, it says, the mind which has all seeds ripens, and the appropriating consciousness deepens subtle, with all its seeds flowing like a river. So let me repeat that. In that sutra it says, the mind which as all seeds ripens, and the appropriating consciousness deepens subtle, with all its seeds flowing like a river. So that is exactly describing or talking about this alaya vijnana. That's exactly what this is talking about. So this ground consciousness, this alaya vijnana, what is that then? It is the flow, if you will, the continuum flow of karmic tendencies or seeds, karmic seeds. It is the ground because all other seven consciousnesses arise within it or from it, within it. So, and this is also when the word manas used as mentation, because remember I said that the word manas could be used as mentation or the operation of mind, the way mind functions. So this is, when we speak of the alaya vijnana as this flow of the karmic seeds, in this context, we can also, or it's also used the word manas to refer to the alaya vijnana in the sense of this activity, as this flow of tendencies, like this undercurrent. It's like a very subtle undercurrent of all of these karmic seeds. And in that sense, it is the activity, it is the functioning of mind, and it is manas. So this flow of these latent tendencies, this flow of these karmic seeds, it is empty of true existence. Okay, so the alaya vijnana itself is not an entity. It has no substance. It is not a thing. It's not a ground like in a substantial, solid ground. Okay, so in the same sutra that I just quoted just now, the Samdhamino, the Buddha himself says that. He says that if this consciousness, if this alaya vijnana, that he says is deep and subtle, with all its seeds flowing like a river, if you would conceive of that as being a self, like an entity, that would not be correct. And the Buddha says that's the reason why he didn't teach that to more immature beings. That's why he didn't teach that from the beginning. The Buddha explains like that in that sutra. So we should not think of this alaya vijnana as some kind of entity or something like this. It is not that. So, but because of this afflicted aspect of this ignorance of mind that does not recognize really what this ground is, there is a kind of a fixation on this flow, on this alaya vijnana, as being a truly existing self, as being an entity. Because this flow, this undercurrent of these karmic seeds, this alaya vijnana, it sort of as a kind of a taste, an aroma of permanence to it, in the sense that it seems to be always there. Of course, we're talking at very subtle levels here. In order to actually recognize these things, someone needs to go quite far in their meditation practice. This is happening at a very subtle level within the mind. So because this stream, it feels like something kind of, it is always there in some way. And so there's this ignorant aspect of the mind that seems to not recognize that it is not something fixed, that is not an entity. And it fixates on that alaya vijnana as being an entity, as being a self. And it's exactly that fixation on the alaya vijnana as being a self that we call the seventh consciousness, manas. And here manas is the name of the seventh consciousness, which is this attributing or this projecting into the alaya vijnana this selfhood, this entity status. And from the moment that happens, then this manifestation of consciousness, that is the seventh consciousness, it becomes like the agent, it becomes the I. It is the appearing subject of experiences, and it's also the agent that performs actions. And that is how this illusory I arises. So this is a very brief introduction to this model of eight consciousness in a general sense. So to summarize, The alaya vijnana is the stream of these latent seeds, which manifests as the 5 aggregates and the 5 elements and so on. And it is this alaya vijnana itself which is purified by the path. That is what Nagarjuna is saying in that stanza. What is purified by the path? It's exactly this alaya vijnana, which is this stream of seeds. So the naturally abiding purity, which is the result of this purification, is actually the natural condition. That is what is called nirvana. And that is also what is called dharmakaya. So from a relative level, we say that what we call the experience of a sentient being, in another way, in a conventional level, from a conventional perspective, we say that what we call the experience of being a sentient being is these 8 consciousnesses. Is the play, if you will, the play of these 8 consciousnesses, which is these karmic seeds, latent and then active, that give rise to the other 7 consciousnesses. Or in other words, the stream of these latent tendencies that flows is what we call the alaya vijnana. And as such, this alaya vijnana itself is of the nature of ignorance. So these seeds, as they become activated due to causes and conditions, and they manifest, they give rise to the other consciousnesses. That is to say that what appears as like a visual consciousness, for example, or mental consciousness, together with their objects, so the visual consciousness and the objects of the visual consciousness, they are the manifestation or the ripening of these seeds that are flowing within the ground consciousness, the alaya vijnana. So then there's also that which we call the cognitive power of mind. So mind, now generally speaking, as this attribute, if you will, which we can refer to as this knowingness, this knowing power, that which knows. Just that quality itself, without any particular object or character, just the mere ability to know, that power, that knowing power. So that knowing power of mind, it mistakenly takes this alaya vijnana as something solid, as something stable, permanent, truly existent. And that is what we call the 7th consciousness, because then it arises as this reified self, reified, truly existing self. Right, so this is another way to sort of summarize now these principles. Of course, if someone would study, and later if we would study in much more detail the philosophical tenets, if we would study the different Shittamatra and Yogacara views and so on, there's a lot more detail that gets developed from this. But I think as an introduction is probably enough. So another thing we can understand here, we could ask, or as a result of understanding this, we could ask, what is it that moves from lifetime to lifetime? So if we say that there's rebirth, for example, and that in the next life someone will experience the results of their karma. So how does that happen? Because mind is empty of true existence. That mind has no true existence. We established that when we studied the Sword of Wisdom, for example. So the Nagarjuna has established that. Nagarjuna has established that. So mind self is empty of true existence. It's empty of any true nature. Karma itself is empty of true existence, is empty of true nature. So what is it that, when we say that there's a next life and that someone will experience the result of this karma, what is that exactly? So now we can understand, because that would be explained, that is exactly the alaya vijnana, right? So it is the stream of seeds that we call the Laya Vijnana. We could even say that to use the word rebirth is even a little bit excessive, if we understand this, because it is just this continuum, this continuum. While there is ignorance, this ignorance, all the actions, body, speech, mind, that are done rooted on this ignorance of a truly existing self and other, will create another seed in the Laya Vijnana that will ripen later. So that's how this cycle keeps going. And that is also, though, how someone could make the mistake of confusing the Laya Vijnana with some kind of a soul, or some kind of a permanent entity that carries on. But it is not like this. It is more like a river. So that's the example the Buddha used, is like a river, and it's a good example. A river is not something permanent. A river has no real identity of its own. It is just a flow of water molecules. There's not even a single instant where there's anything at all permanent and stable in there. Not even for an instant. It is just a flow of water molecules. So the river is totally empty of true existence as a thing. There's no entity there. The river has no soul. The river has no essential thing. And yet it flows continuously. But it's never anything fixed. So the Laya Vijnana, in addition to being just like the flow of the habitual tendencies, is also totally illusory. It's truly empty of existence. And it's exactly by not seeing this that the eye is projected upon it. Just like we project the notion of a river onto that flowing water. We look at a river, we look at that body of flowing water, that incessant flow of molecules, ever changing. But if you pay attention to your own mind, you'll see that there's a kind of an entity there that you're actually perceiving. If you think about it, then you understand that actually there's nothing fixed there. But what you perceive in your mind, actually, you have this feeling. Feeling is not the best word, but there is this sort of perception of an entity there. We can give it a name. You call it the river, whatever. But even the name is not necessary. Even before the name, there's this very clear perception of a thing there. That's that river. But which river? What's their fixed entity? There is no such thing there. So that's exactly the same thing that is happening with the Laya Vijnana and this seventh consciousness. Okay? So, but it's important to understand that when I explain it like this, I'm not just referring to the river as a conceptual entity or a conceptual construct. It is deeper than that. It is more subtle than that. It is the actual reification that there is a thing there, that is this entity, the river. Okay, so once this I, the self, is projected upon this stream of seeds together with its manifestations, then it seems to act and to engage with all these objects of mental consciousness or visual consciousness and so on. But all these objects that appear, that the self seems to engage with, being the thoughts, the objects of the mental consciousness, or being the objects of the sensory consciousnesses, so all these objects, in reality, they are nothing else other than the activation, if you will, of the seeds of that are arising from the Laya Vijnana. However, because this is not realized, then we have this illusion of this duality between self and the things that appear to the six that are done, they create new tendencies, they create new seeds that are deposited in the Alaya Vijnana. That's why sometimes in some texts the Alaya Vijnana is called the repository, the repository consciousness. And this cycle continues, right? So that's how this cycle of rebirth continues, or cyclic existence. I think that's quite enough, maybe. But it's important to note here as well that this explanation of the 8 consciousnesses is not talking about, I think I said it before, but I want to repeat it again. It's not talking about some truly existing 8 consciousnesses, okay? So when we speak about these 8 consciousnesses, we are speaking from the conventional perspective. This is something that is perceived at the conventional level. So Nagarjuna, as I said before as well, being the father of Madhyameka, he showed clearly that all phenomena are beyond the 4 extremes of existing, not existing, both and neither. They are emptiness. They lack any intrinsic nature. So in this first stanza, Nagarjuna is not saying that samsara and nirvana or dharmakaya or the 8 consciousnesses or Alaya Vijnana or whatever, any of these things, he's not saying that any of that is truly existent, okay? So it's very important to understand the difference when we are speaking from the perspective of the conventional or the ultimate. But also to understand that finally, that which we call conventional and ultimate are indivisible. They are inseparable. The great indivisibility. So when we studied the Sword of Wisdom, for example, we studied these 2 levels of conventional and ultimate in great detail. So you can remember that. So ultimately, there are no 8 consciousnesses as any truly existing thing. Even the Alaya Vijnana itself, the ground consciousness, is totally an illusion, totally illusory, empty illusory. However, as sentient beings, or from the perspective of sentient beings, that's how it seems to appear. That's how it seems to happen. That's how things seems to function as these 8 consciousnesses. So another way to say it or to think of it would be that this is kind of a very skillful way to explain how things are working at the conventional level and how to transcend to reaching an understanding of the ultimate level of suchness. So the Alaya Vijnana is to be considered in general as I said, the repository of these karmic seeds. So if we think of the Alaya Vijnana in this sense of the repository, where these seeds are deposited and then they flow from there and they ripen into manifestation. If we think of it in those terms, that's when we would have to understand that the Alaya Vijnana itself is neutral, is of a neutral nature. So if we think in terms of virtue and unvirtue, positive and negative, the Alaya Vijnana itself would be of a neutral nature, because it can store seeds of negativity and it can store seeds of virtue, both, right? So so if the Alaya Vijnana was really just purity, so to speak, then it could not store seeds of unvirtue, like seeds of anger, for example, and vice versa. So the Alaya Vijnana in itself, we say it's of neutral nature. And that neutrality, actually, this is not for now, this will be much more a kind of advanced topic, and that neutrality itself is connected to this aspect of unknowingness, this aspect of ignorance. In any case, going back to the original stanza. So in this stanza, Nagarjuna is saying that, so what is purified? So what is purified in the path is this Alaya Vijnana. That is what is to be purified by the path. Once this Alaya Vijnana is purified, what is it that remains? In other words, once the stream of latent tendencies together with the 7 consciousnesses are purified, do we end up with nothingness? Just nothing? It's all gone? No. That would be like nihilism. So what do we end up with? That's what the text is saying. So what we end up with is nirvana, or the Dharmakaya. Right? In the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha said that what ceases is not the intrinsic aspect of consciousness, as in the nature of mind, the luminous aspect. What ceases is only its karmic aspect. Because if this intrinsic aspect, the luminous aspect, ceased, then the alaya as the luminous nature would cease as well. And that's illogical. That would be just pure nihilism. Okay, so what the Buddha is saying in the Lankavatara in that part is actually one of the main points that Nagarjuna will also explain in this treatise. So that which is exhausted, that which is purified or eliminated, is the temporary defilements, or the alaya vijnana, right? The luminous nature of mind itself, that is unborn and unceasing. So what happens to this alaya once all the defilements are purified? The Buddha also explains that. So the Buddha explains in the Lankavatara as well that once these defilements are purified, what remains, so to speak, he says something like, is truth that is free from discrimination, from duality, an excellent state attained inwardly within the mind, pure knowledge that is known only to the Tathagata, to the Buddha, which is free from all consciousnesses of action. This is the one self-nature that is beyond the realm of reasoning and representation and speech, suchness. Loosely quoting. I think that's probably enough for this stanza, I believe. Okay, I think that's enough for this stanza. I think that's enough for today. So then, in the next session, we will continue with stanza 3, which starts the detailed explanations. That now Nagarjuna will use a series of examples to show how this element abides at the time of a sentient being. So to really clarify how that's possible. So we will continue that on the next session. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.